Today, we're going to be talking about the question of, is co-signing with private equity good for the future of radiology? I'm Gavin Slethaug. I'm the Associate CMO for Growth at Radiology Partners. My second disclosure, of course, is that I'm a shareholder at Radiology Partners, along with over 1,000 other physicians at RP. We represent the largest bucket of owners at RP, physicians. And number three is I'm a shareholder at Southwest Medical Imaging, which is a physician-owned patient medical imaging practice in Scottsdale. First, let's define some terms. Let's define investor-backed practices. And investor-backed practices are basically practices that have ownership by non-physicians. Private equity is a type of financing involving investments of equity capital, not debt capital, but equity capital. They actually own the equity or a portion of the equity in private companies. Common investors, pension funds, sovereign funds, endowment funds, we'll get into that. Venture capital is also a term that's used, and this is a form of private equity. Venture capital is a little different in that it involves investments in companies that are believed to have long-term growth potential, similar investors as above. And a public company everyone's familiar with, a company whose shares are freely traded on a stock exchange. At Radiology Partners, we have both private equity and venture capital investors, which makes us a bit of a hybrid. The commonality amongst our handful of outside investors is that they're growth-oriented and understand that investment returns come from building new capabilities and enhancing the clinical value and service that we provide. So what is private equity? Who owns private equity? It's a term that's thrown about. This is the 2022 list of the largest global investors in private equity. And I just want to call out a few. CPP Investments is the largest investor. This is the Canada Pension Plan. I'm actually an investor in this because I grew up in Canada. I had a number of summer jobs along the way, and I contributed to the CPP. The largest U.S. investor is the California Public Employees Retirement System. This Australia Future Fund here at number 20. Now, the Australia Future Fund I bring up for two reasons. Number one, it's an example of a sovereign fund. So a fund that invests on behalf of a country. Why does Australia have one? And why does the US not have one? Well, Australia runs a surplus and they have money to invest. The US runs a deficit. We have no money to invest. The second reason I bring it up is because Australia Future Fund is one of the largest investors in Radiology Partners. And so the citizens of Australia own a portion of Radiology Partners. The largest endowment fund is Yale. It beat Harvard and Stanford just down the list a little bit, but these endowment funds are large investors in PE as well. Finally, for completeness and before we move on, I should call out that there are a number of funds on this list which indirectly invest in RP through RP's largest private equity investor, which is called New Enterprise Associates. Other thing I want to get out is that all practices are not alike. Academic practices are not all alike. Private practices are not all alike, and investor-backed practices are not all alike. What's the scope of these investor-backed practices? And what's fiction and what's fact? This is an article that came out in the Radiology Business Journal, and the title was Startling Shift, 70% of Physicians Employed by Private Equity Firms or Other Corporate Entities. Now, if you think about this, as you think about your doctor's lounge, are 70% of those physicians employed by PE firms? Well, certainly not in any shape or form what I'm used to. I thought this was sort of a crazy article. It didn't make any sense, and so I looked in it a little closer. There actually is an article behind this, published in 2021. And what actually the article said was that 69% or almost 70% of US physicians are employed by hospitals or corporate entities, not PE firms or other corporate entities, by hospitals or corporate entities. And of this 69%, 49% is by hospitals and health systems, and 20% are by corporate entities. And the corporate entities are defined as insurers and PE firms. Now, this all makes total sense. Lots of people are employed by hospitals. Every person in academics is employed by hospitals. There are other people in non-academics who've also employed by hospitals. In terms of this 20% Of corporate entities, yes, some of this is PE firms, but some of these are insurers. Holy smokes, Optum employs 60,000 physicians. This is what's grouped into this bucket as well. So be careful what you read. Nevertheless, groups are getting larger. In 1989, 84% of groups were less than 10 rads, and in 2018, 48% of groups are less than 10 rads. Groups are getting larger, but still half of all groups are still less than 10 rads. The median size practice in this country is still about 9 radiologists. What about the largest groups? These are ones that oftentimes get a lot of the splash in media. This was the 2015 list that RBJ, Radiology Business Journal, published of the top 30 groups by size, by number of radiologists. And none of them at this time were affiliated with investor-backed entities. Taking exactly the same 2015 list in the same order and fast forwarding it to 2018, this is what happened in the interval. About half of the groups, or half exactly, 15, essentially joined a national practice. What about RP? RP was started at RSNA in 2012 with one radiologist and no studies to read. When my practice joined locally in mid-2017, we were about 400 or 500 radiologists. We're growing significantly, and a lot of that growth has been more recent. Today, RP consists of more than 3,600 radiologists. Radiology Partners is still probably 9 to 10% of all the radiologist market. And adding in some of our other investor-backed entity competitors, the total number of radiologists that are part of investor-backed practices represents probably 12 to 13% of the overall rad market, leaving the rest of radiology, about 87% of rads, not involved with any investor-backed entity. So back to the question, is co-signing with PE good for the future of radiology? It's the wrong question. The right question is access to capital good for radiology? And the answer to this, I believe, is yes. Capital allows scaled investments. And these are scaled investments in a consolidating ecosystem. Investments in clinical programs, investments in AI and IT, investments in physician leadership development, investments in people, processes, relationships, investments in diversification, diversified markets, diversified payers, diversified health systems. Believe scaled investments are good for patients. This is an article that was published by Radiology Partners reporting standardized reporting recommendations in multiple states. Now, we're able to do this because we practice radiology in all 50 states, and we have boots in the ground practices in, I believe, 35 states at this point. This is an article put out a year ago, Radiology Partners and ADOC to accelerate the use of AI as a standard of care. Partnership involves 40 million annual exams, now over 50, because our RP is now doing over 50 million annual exams. This is an example of us updating our natural language processing AI tool, which is homegrown and developed at RP to update with COVID-19 recommendations. This is a quote by Dr. Kurt Langlotz. Because of their scale, RP has more experience deploying radiology AI than any organization in the US. Scaled investments are also good for RADs. This is a 2018 release where RP and 3 universities established Radiology Research Center. This now involves 7 universities. This is a press release showing the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, 13 radiologists named to senior executive leadership roles. This office is now 17 radiologists. And then just this year, we formed our own political action committee, which acts in concert with other organizations, including the ACR, in pushing the ball forward on issues that affect patients and radiologists. And all of this is against the ecosystem that is rapidly consolidating. The clients we are serving are getting larger, and their needs are getting more sophisticated. It is going to take scale to be able to meet those changing needs. Ascension, HCA, Tenet, Common Spirit are examples of healthcare systems that have more than 100 hospitals each, making it very difficult for other smaller groups who may serve only a handful of these hospitals. And this is the payer landscape. I would submit that at any of your practices, unless you're involved in some, unless you're with Indian Health Services or the VA or whatnot, but most of your practices, whether you're in traditional academics or in private practices, 90% of your revenues are coming from some blend of these 5 payers. These payers are all getting larger. So if capital is good, can rad groups just access capital on their own? And theoretically, the answer is yes. Historically and practically, however, the answer is no. So why not? The fundamental private practice model doesn't facilitate large investments. Each investment is put through the lens of partners making less. You're going to make X this year, but if we invest in this new AI tool or this new IT tool or this new physician leadership development program, you're going to be making $50,000 less or $100,000 less. And the reality is that every rad situation and outlook is different. Some are willing to take more risk on that. Some are willing to take less risk. Some financial situations may be significantly different than others. Some may have graduated with significant loans and have a new mortgage and a new family. Others may be mid-career in a different situation. Others may have 2 to 3 years left in their career and don't want to be making investments for something that will impact the group for the next 20 years. Outside capital unlocks this paradigm. So in summary, is access to capital good for radiology? Yes. Why? It allows scaled, differentiated investments and the ability to better interact with large market constituents. PE investment is one source of capital to support this. Are all PE entities the same? Of course not. In the same way that not all academic practices and private practices are the same. If you're interested in an investor-backed model, pick the right investor and make sure they're aligned with your goals and your mission. Third, be careful what you hear and what you read. Some is fact and some is fiction. And finally, I'll submit it to you that it's probably the most important. We're talking about different practice models. A reminder to keep your spears pointed outwards. The biggest threats to radiology aren't the type of practice models that are being described, the investor-backed entity practice model, the private practice practice model, the employed practice model, the academic practice model. The biggest threats to radiology and the biggest headwinds in our specialty are a number of factors. For one, the number of studies that continue to be increasing, the CTs and MRs going up 6 to 9% per year, and the number of radiologists being produced going up 1 to 2% per year. We need to solve this. Otherwise, there will continue to be access problems for patients who need care the most, or in underserved areas that need care the most. There are revenue challenges that radiology practices are facing. Medicare continues to cut us year by year. They gave us another 2% cut this year at a time when inflation is running high single digits. They continue to slowly defund radiology Medicare services, and we need to correct this. Otherwise, there will be access problems for patient. And finally, the way that the insurance companies are taking advantage of the No Surprises Act to put radiology groups out of network and drive radiology reimbursement down. These are the biggest headwinds facing our specialty right now. It's not the type of model. Having said that, this is a great topic. I enjoy listening to these different practice models, hearing strengths and weaknesses about them, hearing challenges, et cetera, but a reminder to keep your spears pointed outwards. So thank you.